Okay, our next session is a 15-minute session, and it's Peter Neubauer. The title is Amateur Radio in the Apple II. Peter's going to share how radio hobbyists use the Apple II computer and will demonstrate how you can do the same. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Andy. In the next 10 minutes or so, I'll give a whirlwind tour of what amateur radio is and how that relates to the Apple II. I'll leave you with enough information so that you too can do this, so that you can experience amateur radio with state-of-the-art 1980s technology. Amateur radio is informally the hobby of playing with radios. It's a broad hobby. It involves deeply technical topics such as radio design, antenna design, and construction. It also involves public service aspects as well as contest and social aspects. Amateur radio hobby started about 120 years ago with the work of Marconi, an Italian inventor and physicist. Jumping back to the 1980s, the personal computer revolution changed the face of the amateur radio hobby. It gave amateurs many new opportunities, many new ways to use their radios. This photo on the left is from the November 1987 issue of A+. There was an article in that magazine about a particular type of radio communications with the Apple II called packet radio. In the 1980s, amateur radio and computer crossovers were incredibly popular. There were multiple books. If you take a look at the Internet Archive, one popular amateur radio magazine from the era is called 73. This magazine had multiple issues dedicated entirely to one particular way of using your computer with your amateur radio called packet radio. You open up any of the issues, though, there's multiple articles and multiple ads about computers and amateur radio. I particularly like the recumbent bike that somebody equipped with multiple computers, as well as an amateur radio. Top center here, you see a photograph of a homebrew Apple II connected to an amateur radio as well, and then also a Commodore SX64 with an embedded radio modem that someone put inside. This diagram from the 1987 issue of A+ nicely summarizes the appeal of connecting amateur radio to your personal computer. This offered the opportunity, the promise of telecommunications over thousands of miles without having to pay a telephone company and without having to pay a subscription service fee. There are roughly two categories of communication with an amateur radio. The first category is what they call phone mode. This is when you use the radio to send and receive voice. The other option is called a digital mode, where computers exchange information. This might be exchange of chat-like communications, emails, BBS-like functions, and files. So next I'll dig into specifically how you would use your Apple II with an amateur radio. There's two categories of use of the radio with the Apple II. The first is called disconnected, where you have the Apple II alongside your amateur radio but not connected to it, and the other connected. And there's a little more nuances to the connections I'll get into later. The disconnected operation is actually more useful and more popular than it might seem at first. A typical amateur has an opportunity to use the computer for logging functions, for electronic circuit and filter and antenna design. There's multiple public domain software collections out there that fit into this category. APPLE has, I believe, 4 discs available for download from their website. Asimov has a number of other discs as well. Most of the discs on Asimov are French language amateur radio software. I don't believe that the Amateur radio software for the Apple II is very well preserved. I've seen a lot of references in magazines to software, commercial software, that as far as I can tell is not available anywhere. This book lists a couple of additional public domain software disks. The disk entries seem to be very similar to what's on the APPLE website right now, though the contents is a bit different, and I couldn't find the disks that go with this book. Next, I'd like to talk about how to connect your Apple II to the amateur radio for the digital communications, the ability to send computer data over your radio, potentially thousands of miles. The first category of operation involves a terminal unit. A couple of manufacturers use slightly different terms, such as computer patch, but what distinguishes this approach is that the interface box, the box of electronics that connects the radio to the Apple II, is all analog. This is a photograph of one popular early 80s terminal unit or computer patch. If you open this box up, you see a pile of analog electronics. Those little silver integrated circuits in the middle are op amps. On the receive side, this box connects to the amateur radio, then a series of analog filters, a discriminator, and finally connects to the gain port on your Apple II. You need specialized software on the Apple II to decode that bit stream. This box just presents a bit stream, makes no attempt to decode or make sense of the bit stream or distinguish valid data from noise. On the transmit side, again, this connects to the gain port in your Apple II. Specialized software generates the right bit stream, and there's a tone generator on the circuit board. There's a number of other manufacturers making very similar terminal units. There's also circuits available that you could build yourself. I particularly like this ad because it highlights the engineer. The text of the ad, which you can see part of, talks about the qualifications of the engineer, the technical excellence of the circuit. It's a departure from the ads that I see nowadays. If you want to get started with this approach, I recommend Dr. Golfo's ham radio communications package, because as far as I was able to find, this is the only software for this type of interface that is well preserved. A hobbyist, Michael Legal, scanned the documentation, image of the software a few years ago. It's available on his website. The appendix to that manual includes the connection diagram for how to connect your terminal unit, whatever it might be, to your Apple II's gain port. There is other software promising to do similar functions out there on Asimov right now, but it is not well documented. I don't know if the images work. It seems like a difficult place to start. This is the only book I've been able to find on the topic. This book describes the hardware that was available in the early 80s for this type of interfacing. It talks about a variety of personal computers from the era. It does mention the Apple II a few times. There aren't connection diagrams for the Apple II, but most of the information can be transferred to what you want to do with the Apple II. This book was published in 1983. It is still available new from the original publisher. It seems that they may have printed a few too many copies. By the mid-'80s, though, this all-analog box started to reach its limitations. Amateurs were looking to do new, more complex things, more complex tasks, increasingly CPU-intensive. So they turned to boxes like this, terminal node controllers or all-mode controllers. Again, there are many on the market, and this is just one example. This is distinct in that it contains a complete computer. This particular one contains a Z80 based computer on the left-hand side of the circuit board. The right-hand side are some analog circuits. This connects to your Apple II via a serial port. Units like this tend to be pretty complex. This manual is several hundred pages with complex commands that you need to type into your terminal program. I like to use ProTerm with this, but any terminal software will work. Some amateurs also developed a specialized terminal software. This is one example. It's called Apple Packet Radio, developed by an Italian hobbyist. And this is a terminal program that adds a couple of additional features to make it easier to work with the complex command set of the all mode controller that I showed earlier. It adds file transfer functions, some printing and logging features that are particularly useful to the Apple II user.
5 minutes, Peter.
Thanks, Andy. There's a lot of resources out there. As I mentioned, there was a lot of excitement, a lot of press, a lot of interest in using the amateur radio with a personal computer, particularly the Apple II. I've listed a number of books and resources that I found here. If you want to start with just one resource, I recommend the Your Gateway to Packet Radio book that's in bold in the middle here by Stan Hozepa. It is available on the Internet Archive, and used copies are readily available for literally a few dollars from your favorite used book reseller. I like this particular book, specifically the second edition, because it gives some history of packet radio and amateur radio in the 1980s. It offers specific guidance on using your radio with the Apple II. A lot of the information is still relevant. There's also some nice screenshots and diagrams from the Macintosh in this particular one. Prefer the Apple II, but Macintosh is better than some of the other options in my opinion. Anyway, I welcome discussion and questions.
Peter, we got a few questions that came through the chat.
Okay.
One, can software-defined radio be processed by Apple IIs?
No, it cannot. The Apple II doesn't have the processing capability to do modern software-defined radio. The closest you can get is with the analog terminal unit that I talked about originally. But even then, there's still a large box of analog electronics that has to pre-process the audio before it gets to the Apple II.
Okay, a second question. Do you have any information on the data format, specifically how it's encoded and pushed through the game port?
Yes, the manual for Dr. Gulfo's ham radio communications package has a wiring diagram that shows exactly how to connect your terminal unit over to your Apple II. It's not plug and play. There's nothing like a USB port that you might have on a modern radio. You will need to sit down with the manual for your terminal unit, such as the CPU one that I showed earlier, and the manual for your software, match up the wiring, and build your own cable though.
Okay, a couple more if we have time. Does ProTerm still work?
Works for me. I was using it yesterday.
Okay, and the next one. Is there an easy, inexpensive way to get into packet radio with an Apple II today?
Your best bet is to get a terminal node controller or an all-mode controller, such as the AEA PK232. Units like that or similar units from Cantronics are available inexpensively and regularly on eBay, and they plug into the serial port on any of your favorite Apple IIs. The serial port approach is the simplest. You don't need specialized software other than serial communications, and you can use a standard serial cable.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you. I'll be available on chat later if you'd like to get into some of the details.